Hi there, I'm Sashi Sivram Krishna and welcome to my course Macroeconomics, a Modern Money Theory Perspective. We are in part 1 of the course Macroeconomics and Money. In lecture 13, we will discuss Essentials of Money 1. We now move from our survey of macroeconomics into the realm of modern money. Broadly speaking, there are two theories of money. The first is what we can call as the barter theory of money, and the other, the state theory of money. The barter theory of money emanates from classical thought, where money is seen as an invention or an innovation that occurs in the private sector to overcome some of the inefficiencies of barter, in particular the double coincidence of wants. Now we all know that the double coincidence of wants can limit trade and exchanges and thereby also inhibit the complete division of labor and consequently does not allow full specialization as well as improvements in the standards of living and productivity. So money is something which the private sector comes up as a way of overcoming this problem and introduces a commodity which could be anything from sheep and cattle to gold and silver as an intermediary product which would then overcome the problem of the double coincidence of wants. So money is essentially a medium of exchange, and this medium of exchange is normally thought to be a commodity which might have some intrinsic value in the sense that it has a market value and can be sold in the market. Now, the barter theory of money defines money more in terms of its functions. And these three functions, which we all know maybe from high school, would be that it's a unit of account so that all prices can be expressed in terms of this common denominator or what we call as a numeraire. It's also a medium of exchange, and finally it's a store of value, which says that this money or good money can retain value so that the exchanges may be deferred and can take place at a later point in time. So for example, something like a sheep might not be an ideal medium of exchange, since as time passes it would lose its value. In that sense, gold and silver would retain value over a long time and can be considered as a good medium of exchange or good money. So overall, what the classical economists were arguing is that money is neutral. It does play this role in making exchanges smooth, but more than that, it's not something we need to focus our attention on. Instead, we should go beneath the veil of money and study the exchange mechanism and the real economy. And that's what, if you recollect in your studies, you would have seen that's what we do in microeconomics. We do express prices in terms of a currency like rupees or dollars, but then we really don't delve into what this notion of money really is. We concentrate more on issues like how the market system works, how exchange takes place, what is the value created in exchange, and so on. And this school of thinking has actually permeated right through the classical theories that we have seen that have come up in more recent years, since the 1970s, including monetarism, the new classical theories, new Keynesian theories, as well as the real business cycle or RBC theory. The second theory of money is what we may call as the state theory of money. Here the story of modern money does not begin with the problems associated with barter. Instead, it begins with the need of the state to provision itself with real resources, in particular labor. And this labor has to be sourced only from the private sector, because the state in itself does not own labor. Now the question is, how does it go about getting labor to work for it? One way is through compulsion. They force labor to do it, maybe a certain number of hours per week or days per month and so on. But this is a kind of slavery. It's not an efficient system. So the state would have wanted a more efficient system without the kind of possible abuse of power and so on. And it can do this through the issue of what we call as promissory notes, or what can also be referred to as an IOU. Now these are promissory notes, which means they are financial liabilities of the state. Now two questions arise as to why the state would issue such promissory notes, and really what are they promising to exchange these IOUs for. So in this case, what we are saying here is that the state approaches labor, buys labor from the private sector. In return, it issues an IOU. What can we do with this IOU? What is the state promising to exchange this IOU for? The second question is, why should the private sector actually accept these promissory notes? So the answer obviously depends on the previous question. The answer to both these questions is this: the state promises to take back these promissory notes, and only these promissory notes, in settlement of obligations due to it. And this is the key of modern money. Essential aspect of modern money is that the state issues an IOU, which we accept as the private sector only because if there are any obligations due to the state, we have to settle them with these and only these IOUs or promissory notes. The state will not take back any other money thing in exchange for the obligations that the private sector owes to it. Before I discuss what exactly are these obligations that we may owe to the state, let me give you a better idea of what modern money really is. And this is what I've called as Warren Mosler's experiment. Warren Mosler is considered to be one of the founding fathers of modern money theory. And what he says in his lectures is to take the situation where he is the teacher in a classroom and he has about 20 students in the class. And he would ask all the students to stay back after the class for an hour to clean up the room. Why? Because this is good for the entire class and maybe for the class which subsequently comes to use that room. Now, what would he give the students in return for 1 hour's worth of labor? What he offers them is his visiting card, and he asks the students whether they would be willing to work for 1 hour in exchange for his visiting cards. Obviously, none of the students raise their hands. They don't want his visiting cards because there is no value in that card. He then changes the conditions and he says that, okay, there is one problem here. If you want to leave the room, you have to produce my visiting card at the exit, because there is a person there who will prevent you from leaving the classroom unless you hand over a visiting card. He then asks the students whether they would exchange 1 hour's worth of labor for his visiting card. And indeed, all of them agree. And this is really what the state does. It imposes an obligation on the private sector and then offers its tokens or visiting cards, or what we can call as a promissory note, in exchange for their labor. And we would be willing to work for the government in order to acquire these visiting cards. Now, it need not be that all of us agree to do it, but at least some of us would agree to acquire those visiting cards, which it can then use for exchanges with the rest of society, but because ultimately all of us need access to these visiting cards in order to settle obligations due to the state. Now the question is, Why do economists, especially in the orthodox realm that we are presently working in and in mainstream economics, why do these economists always prefer to discuss the barter theory of money and ignore the state theory of money? The answer is quite simple actually, because the barter theory really decenters the role of the state in a modern economy and instead focuses entirely on the market system without including the state in the entire discourse or narrative. So, one way to exclude the state when we are discussing the market system is to look at money simply as a medium of exchange rather than a way of the state provisioning itself, which then brings the state into the focus or into the center stage of macroeconomics.